Welcome to the Endurance Tribe podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie. Welcome to episode 50. We are officially middle-aged.
It's sort of been an abrupt transition. I'm pretty upset about it, but I'm trying to make the most of it. And actually, in all seriousness, I'm so excited that we're here. It's amazing that we started this in December and we actually made it to 50 episodes. That feels like a lot, but it's gone by really fast.
We were worried about getting 5 podcasts, and now here we are. We added a 0. So this is a little off script, but what is the one thing that's the most surprising? Because you've been with all 50 of these podcasts. What's the most surprising thing that you've either learned or you feel, or just sort of like the one thing is like, wow, this was unexpected?
Oh, that's such a good question. This really is off script. I think something that stood out to me is that I find that the very best insights that we get and the best conversations that flow are ones where we haven't actually sketched out all the details beforehand. It's really helpful for us, of course, to just make notes and know exactly what we're going to talk about. But I think we really start kind of vibing when we can go into something that we haven't really planned. So I'm glad you asked me that question. And I think I've had some of my best insights doing that. And I think that speaks to the importance, too, of not feeling like you have to rehearse everything that you ever do. Like sometimes you might say something. I certainly say things on this podcast where I'm like, yeah, I might have said that differently. But if I spend all my time overthinking what I'm going to say on this podcast, like we'll never get another episode. We will never get to episode 51. So kind of just trying to be your authentic self and really letting it flow, I think has been really interesting for my creative process. And I think it's helped me in life too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of along the same lines of the same thing as like overthinking or just like kind of going with it. And it is, like you say, it's kind of scary. I always feel like it's race day on podcast day. And to be honest with you, I kind of like, I don't know, I kind of hang around the house a little bit. Like, oh, I'm kind of nervous, I don't seem to do a lot before the podcast days, or just sort of like I wake up like, oh my gosh, it's podcast day. And I love it. And this is a great process, and it makes us better coaches and better people. And for me, it's a clarity drug. And we're always writing things down in our outline. But you're right, sometimes you have to sort of say it. And also, we reserve the right to be wrong because we're wrong all the time. So that's okay. Yeah. But I just want to say everybody out there that, time is all we have in life. And just I really appreciate that folks spend a little bit of time with us every week, listening to what we have to say. And I hope we have something valuable to say to the community. So I just want to say thanks.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. And I think we're going to keep it going for however long. It's really a labor of love. We've talked about this before, that we don't really make money off this podcast, and we're not trying to make money off this podcast. Although Nature's Bakery, if you're out there, we will take the sponsorship anytime. But yeah, it's just something that I think really makes us better and transcends both like the sport domain, the coaching domain, and the life domain as well. So thanks for listening. And with that, I don't know, Jim, should we stay on task and jump into our coaching and training insights?
Let's do it. We had so much banter, too much chit chat going on here. And folks, when we started this podcast, we're like, we're going to have a podcast just full of content. We're going to do no chitter chatter whatsoever. So
I know. And now we're at that like 50-50, half banter, half content. So I don't know. We'll take feedback. If people don't like the banter, just let us know and we'll shut it down and go straight into like, this is how you set your FTP type stuff.
That'd be awful. Please.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm jumping into coaching and training insights. So my first one is, we have been talking about the off season. I am still in the off season, but I'm sort of at the end of the off season where I'm ready to do some stuff and have fun. And I have been doing a little bit of Strava segments as a really fun type of off season, small dose anaerobic stimulus. So if you're not on Strava, basically Strava has maps of places all over the world, and users can go in and say, hey, I'm going to decide that from this road to this road is a Strava segment. And then anyone who's ever biked or run on that segment of road gets a time on a leaderboard, and then the best person gets what's called a QOM or a KOM, King of the Mountain, Queen of the Mountain, or you can get a course record for running, etc. So all this is to say that if you plan out your route around different Strava segments, you can actually have these little races with yourself or with other people as you go out on your rides. And what I've been doing on a lot of my otherwise zone 1-2 rides recently is going out and saying, yeah, I'm going to ride 90 minutes, zone 1 and 2, but I'm going to include 1 or 2 or maybe 3 Strava segments in there. And I'll look at the map beforehand and say like, hey, what would be a fun one to do? This is a cool stretch of road. This is a safe stretch of road. And this is a place where I can just hammer as hard as I can for, say, 30 seconds. And it's fun because you get this opportunity to really kind of tap into your competitive edge, and you can play to the conditions a little bit. So sometimes I'll say, hey, there's a really good tailwind, and I know that if I get on my TT bike and go do this mile-long straight segment by the ocean, I'm going to be able to go 30 miles an hour or something on that segment. And so I've just been doing that here and there. And for me, I mean, part of it's fun to try to chase those crowns, as we say, but part of it's fun to just kind of chase yourself. So I've actually gone out recently and just been trying to take Strava segments from me that I got previously and say, hey, like, I'm fitter than I was before. I'm going to go faster than I did last time. And so I just really recommend this because I find it's a lot easier for me to push super hard when there's something to chase or some time to chase or even a virtual person to chase. So yeah, just going to recommend that to anyone. And I would say for process, you should, think about your standard go-to routes, see if there's any segments that you're always going to cross because you probably have maybe 20 times on the leaderboard for those. And then there's actually a pretty cool way to just star them on Strava. And if you have a bike computer, you can download them to your bike computer and it will actually count you down as you're approaching the segment and say 3, 2, 1, go. And it'll tell you what time you're chasing so you can really actually chase it. And so it's not necessarily just kind of like a blind segment push. And then, you see if you got it or not. And if you don't, it's okay because you can go back the next time and you can maybe go with a friend who can pull you or you can go with better wind. But one thing I'll say about this that's really important is that sometimes Strava segments will take you like right through a busy intersection or something that's not safe. So I always do like a little scouting ride beforehand and just double check if it's a new segment. Like, hey, is this a safe place to go really hard, put my head down and stay in arrow? But putting yourself in danger is never going to be worth like that QOM or that KOM. So safety first. But yeah, big fan of the Strava segments and recommend them to anyone.
Yeah, I love the organic nature of these things. Like you say, this fits in perfectly. We talked about this in one of our podcasts. So like you could do pickups, right? Or you could do 30-second pickups, 20-second pickups, or a couple pushes. But I love this. And then it sort of gets your community involved because everybody in your area like knows who's on the leaderboard. It's kind of a fun thing. I think it's very friendly competition. I also appreciate that you described Strava. And I would love if anybody out there who's listening to this didn't know what Strava was, like email us. I'll send you something. That'd be awesome. Like, what's a Strava? Like, that'd be awesome. I'll send you a swim cap or something.
There's probably like a 1-to-1 correlation between being on this podcast, listening, and knowing what Strava is. But I don't know. My grandmother listens sometimes, so shout out to her. And maybe she's not sure.
She's gonna get a swim cap.
Yeah, she better. She better.
Well, also one thing you mentioned about like, watching, I love, the same routes over and over again. And like one thing about the Strava segments is you mentioned it, which is like, what are the environmental conditions that day? Sometimes there's just a freaky wind coming the other way. Like say there's a popular Strava segment and usually maybe it's into the headwind, but like a couple times a year, there's a real big tailwind. So you're like, oh wait, there's a big tailwind. And I used to do this all the time in Anchorage. I would chase the headwinds and tailwinds because usually it would come out of the southeast, but we got a north wind. I had a whole list of segments that I'd say, okay, on a north wind day, I'm going out and doing these segments. And I still have segments to this day from 2014 in Anchorage that were north wind on my TT bikes, just hammering as hard as I can. So I'm living forever, I guess, in Strava, or at least in my mind anyway.
That's awesome. And I will say too, you don't always even have to chase the best point on the leaderboard. There's some areas, for example, I am recording this from the Bay Area, California. If I could ever break into the top 10 on any segment in this area, it would be a miracle because it's such tight cycling competition. So think about just trying to hit PRs because Strava keeps track of that as well. So you don't need to be chasing other people. Just consider chasing yourself or just figuring out like how many times have I done this before and how much better can I do it. On the flip side, if I go to Mid-Coast Maine, for example, where I spend a lot of time, I can pretty much get every crown in the area because there's nobody else on a road bike besides one friend of mine and we just fight over all of the segments. So it really comes down to like what place it is and it's not all about the crowns. But yeah, it's about pushing yourself and I think it's really fun.
Okay, so who is the queen of the mountain on Slab City? That's what I want to know.
I still have that one, I think. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Challenge to Ella.
Yeah, right? It's on Ella. Awesome. Okay, so next insight here. This is a quick one, but people, it is dry shirt season. So I went for a run a couple weekends ago in the Fells, which are some trails near Boston, and it was pouring rain, but it was probably like, I think 58, 59 degrees or so. I felt completely fine during it. I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. And then I hopped in my car to drive 10 minutes back into Boston, and I got nearly hypothermic in the car because I was soaking wet and I didn't have a dry shirt or a sweatshirt in the car. So it's really important during shoulder season, especially as soon as you finish up your workout, you should take any wet or cold layers off and put on something dry. Because honestly, hypothermia is something that actually tends to happen more commonly in this shoulder season. Because in the winter, like we're prepared. We come out with our jackets and we're totally ready. We've got hot coffee in the car waiting for us, but you can get really taken by surprise in that like 40 to 60 degree temperatures. So, have your protein shake ready, but just as important is having that dry shirt. Like wet sports bra should come off pretty much immediately.
Yeah, this reminds me, I had a friend who was a Winter Olympian. She was a biathlete. And I said, Stacy, give it to me. What's the one piece of advice I need to be a faster skier? And she just said, you need to change your shirt after every single ski. And so that day, I would always bring a dry shirt after all my skis because, yeah, I get so sweaty out there. And there's nothing better than like putting on a dry shirt like in the parking lot when everybody else is freezing. And you put your jacket on, you're like, oh, I'm so cozy.
It's the best feeling in the world. Yeah. So your pick of the week, dry shirt, any type. All right. So next one, I've been talking about how we're into sports psychology because we're now a sort of psychology podcast. And I wanted to share a different strategy for kind of channeling good thoughts while you're racing that I've learned from the mindset coach that I've been working with. So again, spreading all this stuff to the masses. But basically, the way that he described it is that to be a mentally tough athlete, you really have to know how to think well. And one way to break down thinking well is called this like P3 formula. So P3 thinking is purposeful and productive and possibility thinking. So those are a lot of fun buzzwords. And that stands in converse to what type of thinking you have when you lose focus or maybe you choke. It's usually some pretty poor or self-defeating thoughts. And that comes from R3 thinking. So that's random and reactive and restrictive. So to add some color to what this even means, I'm going to walk you through an example. Let's say you're on the way to your race, you hit bad traffic, and you show up late. So if you're going to fall into kind of R3 thinking, random can be like, I feel rushed and frazzled. That's not super helpful. Reactive can be like, this sucks. You might get upset. You might feel some kind of emotional increase in like anger of being upset. And then restrictive is, I just can't get ready to race that quickly, almost shutting down and saying like, this isn't going to happen. I can't do it. Now, think about the same situation. We could think about P3 thinking instead. So if we break down the P's, purposeful is, okay, I'm going to complete all the tasks I need to do as quickly as possible to get ready for transition. Productive is, hey, I can focus on the preparedness of my body, my experience setting up transition before. I don't need a lot of time there, and my confidence in my training. Like that has not changed because I hit traffic. I'm totally ready. And then possibility actually adds a little bit of hope to the situation. So like, hey, I might actually be better off with less time just in the high stress environment of the transition area, kind of waiting there, absorbing all that stress. Now I can just be really efficient and get it done. And so if you can kind of notice when you're falling into that R3 thinking, any of those types of thoughts, random, reactive, or restrictive, and figure out how to kind of transform it into this P3 thinking, I think that can be really helpful. And I've already kind of started to do that. And a couple of more things to just think about is, your thoughts are actually changeable and controllable. I think it's really easy to feel like, oh, there's all these thoughts in my head and I can't do anything about it. But you don't actually have to let them control you. You can just try to reframe them. It's also really helpful to focus on what you want to happen or hope to happen. That can be really, really powerful because we find that sometimes when you focus on things you don't want to happen or that are bad, it can become sort of that self-fulfilling prophecy. And then the last thing here is we talk a lot about the idea of mindfulness on this podcast, but it's really, really important to just notice when R3 thoughts are into your head and label them. Be like, yep, that is a random thought. That's not really helping me right now, or that's a reactive thought, or that's a restrictive thought. So anyway, I'm working on this, work in progress. I'm hoping we can kind of all as a community work on it together. But if you want to put this into practice, a couple of things you can do is actually start with just a little bit of journaling. So you could journal, say, like a specific thing that happens to you or a situation that triggers me to think or feel badly. What you think, which is usually R3, how that makes you feel and how it hurts your performance, how you can think better, which is P3, and then how that feeling will enhance your feelings, your performance. And if you can create that mental link between like, oh, if I actually change my thoughts, I can do better. Like I can have better performance in this race. I think it's a pretty compelling thing to do. And it's not necessarily so woo-woo to be like, oh yeah, happy thoughts. It's all good. It's like, no, I just want to be faster and I want to win races. So I'm going to have better thoughts to do that. So yeah, I would just practice kind of doing it now and at least noticing when these thoughts are popping in. And you will find they happen all the time if you actually just pay attention to them. And then as you start to reframe them, you can use them in all of your races next year. So yeah, +1 on P3 thinking.
Well, I was so excited when I saw P3. I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about Surreal P3 bikes. This is amazing. This is like, what kind of coaching insight is this? This is great.
That's so funny because Surreal has a line. There's the R3. That's my road bike is an R3. And then the P3, I believe, is their TT bike line, right? So
yeah, exactly right. So yeah.
Maybe the analogy here is if you want to excel in races, you've got to have a P3. You can't have an R3.
Right. Exactly. We've had this conversation before about TT bikes versus road bike. And can you qualify or not qualify? It turns out you can qualify. So R3 is, yes. No, I really like this because it really breaks down, like, I think a lot of times like I'll throw in like, oh, I'm either optimistic or I'm pessimistic. And I think this is sort of gives you a better context and gets a little more granular in terms of like, oh, I'm pessimistic. Okay, why? And then it sort of breaks down as R3. And then like, oh, I can change it though into optimism. And what is that optimism? Okay, this is 3P. So I'm going to work on this. This is a really great, it's easy to remember too as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And I would say like start with journaling. Journaling is amazing. You can do it anytime. You can pop into your training peaks. You can put it in a different training log. You can write it down when you wake up in the morning. But you will find that if you can just have a little bit more awareness of your thoughts, they're totally changeable. Another thing on thoughts, one more psychology insight. I was thinking a little bit about the idea of a scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset in training. And I think this always comes up for me in the fall. I think we've actually talked about this before, Jim, where once the weather starts to get a little bit more inconsistent, anytime there's a nice day, I actually feel like a little bit heightened anxiety to be like, oh my gosh, if I don't spend every single minute that I possibly can outside, enjoying this day, I'm going to waste it because soon we will be in the dark and there won't be any more days like this. And it really feels like you're fighting for super scarce resources. Whereas in June, you're like, this is awesome. I can do whatever I want. I don't feel bad about a day when I swim inside and lift inside and don't get outside because there's so many more of those days. I also feel this a little bit when I think about sort of my long-term athletic journey and my life plans. And I'm like, how many more years will I focus on somewhat selfishly optimizing everything in my life for my own performance before I start a different chapter where that's not necessarily going to be the focus? And that makes me think that like, oh, well, every race and every race season is sort of a scarce resource. And from what I've learned about kind of the difference between scarcity mindset and abundance mindset, scarcity does tend to make us operate from a place of more fear and anxiety. And to go back to what you were talking about last week, Jim, with like the difference between the heart and the mind, that's 100% coming from your mind. And I think sometimes it can actually take away from just being present in these experiences that you're enjoying. Whereas an abundant mindset comes from the heart. And I think it leaves a lot more space for that gratitude to just be like, hey, it's October. Today is 70 degrees and sunny and it's awesome. And I'm so, so, so happy to be here. So it's a very different way to think about things. And so all this is to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm personally just trying to have more of an abundance mindset in thinking about opportunities to train, opportunities to get outside. This is especially true if you have a really busy schedule. Like just be grateful when you can't get outside rather than saying like, oh my gosh, I have to have the best experience ever for the 1 hour that I can allocate to movement. And yeah, just grounding in that gratitude for good weather and what my schedule and my body allow to do now. And reminding myself there will always be more and there is enough to go around.
It's funny you mentioned this good day thing because today we woke up and it's kind of rainy outside. And I was like, thank God it's rainy. I get to take a day off.
I know. Well, I think a couple years, Jim, we have ended up like putting in so much volume because there's been a really good October. And I think one year that actually sort of compromised the season in the spring because we were so not rested leaning into the new season because we biked like 600 miles a week or something. It was just crazy.
Yes. A few years ago, it was an incredible fall. I think I put in like 800 miles. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was a little too much. Yeah. So some days you wake up and go, I hope it's rain. No, but I just love this. And I have to think about, I heard somebody say one time, I think it was like around politics or just sort of world politics, which is like most conflicts are about resources and about resource conflicts. And I always stuck with me in terms of it applies well in terms of a country to country. And then also like people to people, like when I'm having a conflict, it's like a lot of times with somebody else or even myself, it's because I'm doing this scarcity thing, right? Oh, there's a scarce resource and we got to fight over it. And then as I sort of step back a little bit and realize, okay, wait a bit, there's so much of this stuff to go around. There's way so much of this stuff to go around. And my whole attitude changed. Maybe I go from R to, R3 to P3, right? And then I go, oh yeah, right. There is so much abundance out there. But yeah, this is a really cool, I'm really glad you brought this up.
Cool. All right. So my last insight, and I can already tell this is going to be a long episode, but my last insight is an important one. So recently I got connected to a new friend in Boston who has been part of this nonprofit called Back on My Feet for the last 15 years, actually. And this nonprofit basically works with people who are experiencing homelessness or addiction who currently are living in different shelters and recovery facilities. And so members of Back on My Feet, they commit to running or walking 2 or 3 days a week, and they get access to different workshops and personalized support and these one-on-one mentor relationships. And this is a pretty big nonprofit. So they have locations all around 16 different big cities in the US. They have 3 separate locations in Boston. And what it looks like, at least for volunteers, is you show up to these run or walk meetups. They're held 3 days a week. You can do as many or as little as you want. You meet with the group around 5:45 in the morning on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. You walk to a local track together. You do some laps, either walking or running, kind of whatever the members are looking for that day, and then you disperse. It is less than an hour commitment. So anyway, I got connected with this new friend. His name is Jay. And I went to Back on My Feet with Jay last week and then again this week. And I will say the 4:30 a.m. wake up was a little bit tough, kind of like a race day morning type thing. But this has been so far one of the most empowering and rewarding things that I've done in a really, really long time. And I've had a lot of really, really great and deep conversations with different members, which has really got me thinking more about just why movement can be such a powerful way to both break down barriers and build connection. And this is something I think, Jim, you and I have both noticed with, like, if you meet a new friend on a run, sometimes the conversation flows so much more freely than if you like meet someone new for coffee. And I always wonder kind of why is that the case? And I think part of it is that it's very rare these days that we actually give our undivided attention to someone else and we put down our phones and we're just moving together and actually having a deep conversation. So that's one of it. I think too, volunteers, we're always there to run or walk at the same pace as members, and you're doing this shared activity. So that I think acts as a really great equalizer. And what's super cool is this nonprofit even provides like running clothes and shoes for all the members. So you often can't even really tell who's a volunteer and who's a member. It's just people that are having conversations together and doing this shared thing, waking up really, really early in the morning to do something kind of badass and then starting your day in the same way. And I think it sets everyone who's part of this up for success. Many of the members are going to different AA meetings or different types of programming to build, career opportunities. I'm going back to start working and, I'm coaching, I'm doing research, whatever it is. And I think we all get off on the right foot. So yeah, all this is to say, this has been a really important reminder that, people struggling with homelessness or addiction, they're people too. They have families and interests and highs and lows. And often they've just sort of been fucked over by a lot of things that are out of their control. That goes all the way back probably to the environment that they were born into, which is not their fault. And so, yeah, it's just been really, really remarkable to hear all those stories and connect with them, and grateful for how endurance can kind of build that instant connection. It's been great to get to know my new friend Jay through this as well. And I will say, if anyone in any big city really is interested in doing this, they have chapters everywhere. So you should absolutely check it out. We're going to put a link in the show notes. If you don't want to get up at 5:30 in the morning or it doesn't work, you can donate to them. But yeah, this has been an amazing thing that I'm looking forward to keep doing.
This is so cool. I didn't know anything about this at all. So when I saw this come through, I was like, what is this? And it seems like a little bit different. Like, it seems like a lot of cities have, like, you can do group exercise stuff, like the November Project maybe or something like that. But this is exercise with a purpose and like I say, community building. This is just so cool. Wow.
And I'll say too, it's interesting. I was watching their onboarding video for volunteers and they're like, hey, just to be clear, don't go into this with the mindset of I'm getting my perfect workout in. It's not like it's the local track meetup and you're doing a 400 repeats. But honestly, we all need more Z1 too. And last week, I was with one of the members and we were doing like run the straightaways and then walk the curves. And I was like, this is amazing. I am getting zone 1 base training, and I run to the track and I run back from the track, and I'm getting basically like an hour to an hour and a half of zone 1 movement in. So again, I'm not doing this for the workout purpose, but I will say it's amazing base training. So if you need to do more of that, it's an amazing opportunity as well.
And that you and I all talked about, like, humans, we were meant to live in tribes and to work together in tribes, and then just bringing these folks together, like you said, like early in the morning, there's something really kind of badass about that. And it kind of feels kind of a little sneaky, or getting away with it. But yeah, just what a cool way to connect with folks in the city. And wow, this is awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Well, I've been rambling a lot. We're like way into this episode. So I am going to turn it over to you, Jim, for coaching and training insights, and then we'll jump into our main content.
I don't think we're ever going to say, wow, this is a short episode.
That's the goal. Challenge of the week is like do a short episode. Back to the days when they were 30 minutes long. It's so crazy.
Okay, I'll jump into mine. So we're back in the pool at Dartmouth with the Dartmouth Tri-Kids. And one thing I've just noticed right away is that, so this is sort of a swim tip because we're not a swimming podcast, as we know. But especially for beginners, I think the fastest way I can get somebody to actually get in the right position, and especially for really, really, really new swimmers, is to put fins on them and then to have them lightly kick on their back in a streamlined position. And just have them do like 25 cc effort down. And then I'll have them do that like maybe like 4, 5, 6 times until they sort of get the right body position and the right sort of kicking position. And then I'll have them kick down 25 and then flip over and freestyle back again with their fins. And again, and wearing Clayton long fins, it's even better because they're faster and they stay up. And some swimmers think, oh, gear's cheating. Like, gear's not cheating. We need to get people in the right position in order to teach people how to swim. So I've seen people who have just been struggling so much with head position and catch-up stroke and just everything, and sort of just struggling with and really just being their face in the water because your brain is just screaming like, I'm drowning. So you flip people over, put some foot fins on them, and they have all the air that they need. And again, this is sort of just a quickest way. And I still do this in my warm-ups. I still do put my fins on. I still will do like a backstroke or a kick on my back and then turn over and do freestyle. So I have put a link in here for a couple of videos for reference for streamline kicking on back, so you guys can check that out. But again, if you're a beginner or even a intermediate or expert swimmer, like, I really encourage you guys to check this out.
And check out the long fins, plugging them once again.
Exactly. Go fast. I've also put in a couple of videos here of the catch-up stroke as well, too. It's nice to pair that with that. So, and sort of the next one here is also pool related. It is, as we head into the off season, is a reminder that these technical 50s, again, just down and back, maybe a total of 1,500 yards or 2,000 yards in the pool. Maybe it's just 30 minutes, maybe it's 45 minutes into the pool. But if you're short on time or motivation for pool time in the off season, just keep them really, really short and just focus on technical 50s and sort of exercise snacks. And, Kenny, you and I have seen this, like, you can focus on 50s for like a month or 2 months, and then fitness just follows along behind it. And then you can just jump up and swim like a 500 or 1,000. But if you can replicate your stroke over and over and over again, like, you're good to go.
Totally agree with that. And I would say if your schedule allows, it is better to get in the pool, say 3 or 4 times a week for even 1,000 yards each than to do like one single 4,000 yard swim or something like that. A lot of it comes down to consistency, and your form will fall apart after a certain amount of time, especially if you're a newer swimmer. So, if you're going to the gym anyway to lift and you can hop in the pool for 15, 20 minutes, that's huge. Yeah,
frequency is always your friend. The next one here is there's tons of racing going on. We got a lot of folks heading down to Jones Beach, and this will come out after it. But anyway, so we have Jones Beach half Ironman 70.3, and I have an athlete going to Augusta, not Augusta, Maine, Augusta, Georgia, the original Augusta 70.3. So just having lots of pre-race athlete calls, and it was just interesting. I was reflecting back this week, particularly after all these calls, and saying, okay, how did my calls look last year versus what they look like this year? And so like last year, I think I just sort of jumped to like, oh, so here's your pace and here's your goals and here's your watts and this and that. We sort of jumped sort of right into like the hard stuff. And I think this year the calls have been very, very different. And typically we start with like just what's your nutrition plan? And most folks, we have kind of hammered this through in the race some weekends where they've figured out their nutrition and then they're practicing their nutrition. So when they get to race day, race week, they've already been doing this so many times. But again, we go over that. We say, okay, where are you going at with your fueling? And let's look at this sheet. So start with the nutrition plan there because, as we always say, fitness and fueling are equal partners on race day. So all of our athletes are super fit. They just need to fuel it. So that's the first thing we do. And then we typically talk about like environmental conditions, like how hot's it going to be? Where's the wind going to come from? What's the course looking like? Is there going to be a tailwind, headwind, that kind of thing, and sort of making a game plan around the environmental conditions and maybe changing pace goals, because if it's going to be super hot or if it's going to be super cool, maybe it's a little bit faster. So environmental conditions, we talk a lot then about sort of the mental approach, and a lot of folks now have been doing some mental work templates and writing out their goals and barriers and some of this, P3 thinking as well too. And then we start to review some of the past sims and the training and talking through how it felt in relation to the level of effort for the upcoming race. And then by the time we finish all that, we sort of like say, oh, and by the way, like maybe we can run like this pace or like, but I think if you sort of take care of all these other things in advance of that, when you get down to the end, sort of the time and place and the watts sort of take care of themselves, and you sort of organically develop the plan A, plan B, plan C from looking at all the factors above that. So I just found it really interesting that kind of went from like, here's the right to it, to this year going like, let's go through the entire process. And then by the way, you get to the end, you're like, oh, the answer is kind of the same. And it's also a little bit more athlete directed as well too. A lot of folks will ask me like, what's my goal pace? And I'm always like, well, what do you think your goal pace is? So I feel like I'm saying less and less like, here's your goal pace. I don't think I've said to anybody this year, like, here's your goal pace. I think I've had every athlete now say, what do you think your goal pace is based upon all these different factors? So this is kind of an interesting comment and observation I had this week.
Yeah, I've had exactly the same progression with my pre-race calls with my athletes. And I love to start it out by just asking kind of how they're feeling. And then that helps me guide the conversation too. And I will say it's been awesome to see that probably 90% of the time athletes are excited, which is so fun. You want to get to that point and be really, really excited. And it's okay to be nervous. Nervousness and excitement can kind of even overlap a little bit in terms of the somatic effect of those feelings. But yeah, I'm super proud of athletes by the time we get to that pre-race call. And I personally, I don't care that much about what happens on race day. I care for them. I'm hoping that it goes well for sure. But what I'm the most proud of is the prep that it took to get there. And so we just kind of talk about that and then we talk about the plan. And yeah, it's been a really cool season, I think, for all of our athletes.
Yeah, I think we always talk about like, it's easy to say, oh, the racing is the cherry on top. And I think I've always said that, but I think honestly, it's not always been the case. I think in my head anyway, right, for my athletes. But I feel like this year with going through the process that we've been going through and sort of switching things up a little bit and a lot more on fueling and mental prep and that kind of thing, environmental conditions, it really does feel like from the athlete's perspective, like, yeah, I am nervous, right? And I'm psyched for the race and it's going to be awesome. But it truly is the cherry on top this year. So I feel like I kind of feel like we're getting it right almost as coaches. So we're getting better as coaches, I guess.
Totally. And all through the podcast. Love it.
Exactly right. Okay, a couple things here. I kind of read a couple interesting studies, scientific studies this week. And just to preface all these is that I typically don't read the long studies. I try to read the abstract. So if you really want to dig into these things, I have put a link to all these studies that I mentioned. And you can go back and read it and you may come up with totally different conclusions that I came up with. So I just want to preface all that. And I could be totally wrong. But a couple of these this week sort of fall under like the athletes already knew this and then sports science went back and sort of proved that this is true. So one of them was the effect of water dosing on heat strain and performance during endurance running and heat. What does that really mean? Pour water over your head in the race, right? And then you'll feel cooler and you won't actually lower your core body temperature. That's not going to happen. But things like putting ice down, putting water over your head, like this all has a difference. And they did a study with some runners and it just turns out they did better in the time trial when they were pouring water over their head or over their body, whatever. So it's like, again, like, yeah, we kind of knew that already, but science came around and said, okay, yeah, we approved it. So
it's validating. Yeah. And I was just talking to an athlete earlier today who's doing Jones Beach. And I said, my advice for cooling is unless you are actively cold, you should be cooling. So even if you're just room temperature, it can give you a little boost of energy to take that cooling. And sometimes you don't even realize if you're a little bit warm. So yeah, unless you're shivering, definitely do it.
Yep. And I had an athlete who said he bought one of those cooling headband things that we sort of talked about one time. And again, he recognized like, yeah, this is just going to be sort of the placebo effect. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But it works. Placebo always works. And if you feel cooler, when you put this on in T2 and you run out and you feel cooler, like that's perfect. That is working. That is a good tool to have. So, and the other one we had here it was interesting. We've talked about sort of Normatec boots. And it's like, what's the effect of Normatec boots? And you have a pair, I have a pair, I put them on. I always feel really good after I put them on. And sometimes we always say, well, is it because we just sat quietly for 30 to 45 minutes and just did something quietly? Or is it actually Normatec actually working? And it turns out, so the study looked at these sort of compression. I'm not sure if it was Normatex or some other brand, but it basically said, yeah, these things are effective at moving, things. So there's some sort of positive physiological effect to these Normatex. And maybe there'll be a study at some point saying it's also really good for like mentally as well too, but I'm not sure how they did the study. So.
I mean, anecdotally, I know that if my Oura Ring does like daytime stress metrics, and I know that if I sit down with my Normatex on, I can get into the relaxed zone, even if I've been in the stressed zone for literally the entire day. Again, that might be something related to compression. I think it's probably just that I'm finally sitting down and breathing a little bit more deeply. But yeah, this is, again, sort of at the very top end of, hey, you're at 98%. Do you want to get to 99%? But if you're interested in that and you have some money to go throw at something fun, definitely get Normatec boots.
Yeah, exactly right. And I just think in general, like I just kind of like reading some of these studies just because my sort of bias in sort of my working theory is that humans we're super clever and we sort of figure things out, right? And you throw a bunch of people at a problem and they always sort of figure it out, right? And then I think athletes are particularly very clever at figuring things out. And of course, because there's things on the line, there's ego, there's money, whatever it is, we figure out how to get fast and doing various things. And then I think later on, just sports science comes along behind it and says, oh, we notice that athletes are doing these types of things. Now let's develop a study and actually see if in fact it's actually true. And I think a lot of times they come back and they say, oh yeah, actually the athletes were right. They were correct. That's the right thing to do. So anyway, I always feel like the humans are leading the charge. And I think as a coach, it's kind of interesting because we get to see a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And if you listen to a lot of coaching podcasts or podcasts with lots of coaches who are coaching lots of athletes, you'll often hear them say, here's my theory on this. And my ears always perk up and go, that person says that seems to be working a lot for a lot of athletes. And they go, oh, it may be 5 years until sports science comes out and says, hey, this actually works. So I always have my ear attuned to folks who have their eye on a lot of different athletes.
Yeah. And honestly, our data points and I think our theories about what works, which is actually going to segue us into the first question we're going to answer later, But I think a lot of it just comes from experience coaching a lot of different athletes and seeing what worked and seeing what didn't work. And we actually have an incredible data set in our head of lived experiences. And they often say like the best experiment is the N=1. Someone did something and then they did something different and they had a change. And so again, like this is coming from a researcher. I will still say that I've learned the most from anecdotal experiences with athletes. Oh. And it's great to then go back into the science and be like, yeah, dump ice on your head. Awesome. That's fantastic.
Conclusion, dump ice on your head, dummy.
Amazing. Okay, well, those were great insights. And just like I said, I think this segues us into the first question that we're going to answer today. But the topic of our 50th celebration episode is our very first official Ask Me Anything. So I think we wanted to do this because we value the engagement from our community so much that we were like, let's let the community guide the content of our 50th episode. So we sent out a Google form, as we always do, and we said, hey, ask us anything. And we got a lot of really fun questions back. And the way we're going to organize this is first, we're going to answer some broader questions just sort of on life and coaching philosophy and training and our evolution as athletes. Then we're going to do some fun and silly rapid fire questions. And then we're going to do a lot of questions on actual triathlon training and principles, which was by far the most common set of questions that we got. Because at the end of the day, we try to be a life podcast and a psychology podcast, but we're a triathlon podcast. So lots to say about heart rate and electrolytes and all that good stuff. But I don't know, Jim, you think we should start with the fun stuff first, the life stuff?
Let's start with the fun stuff. And yeah, our community delivered on this. So this was really cool to see. So thanks everybody for asking all these great questions. And all these questions always make me like think like, wow, I got to really think about this. Like, what do I really think about this and write it down? So thank you to the community.
All right. Well, first question here. I'm going to have you answer this one first, Jim. It says, how do you navigate when as coaches you have different philosophies on guidance you share with athletes, or do you have areas where you have different philosophies?
Right. And sort of I answered a little bit of this in the last part here, which was, so when I hear someone like espouse a different training philosophy, like I try to listen very carefully because I probably have something to learn. And I've told Katie this, like I'll often go back and listen to our podcast, not because I want to hear myself talk. I don't want to hear myself talk, but I do want to hear what Katie has to say because you have a whole other set of perspective and athletes. And, our training principles are very aligned, but sort of the applications and the tactics are infinite. And I just love learning about that, from other people. And I also just follow, I follow a lot of podcasts that have coaches and I'm always constantly like, what are they doing? And so, I think curiosity is part of what makes a good coach. And I think, knowing when you're good at something is an important life skill, but I think knowing what you're bad at is even a more important life skill.
Yeah. And sometimes it can feel tough, especially if you're a coach and someone asks you a question to be like, I'm not really sure about that type of thing. Or sometimes we've had intro calls with athletes and we're like, this might not actually be a good fit because I don't really know anything about mountain biking. Like I know a lot about Zone 2, but if someone wants me to be their mountain bike coach, I don't really know how to support that super well other than some of our key principles. And that can be hard to admit, but I think the ability to admit that is really important. And I'll second basically everything you said. There are not too many things that we differ on in terms of core philosophies, but I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that very few of our training principles are controversial. And part of the magic, if you will, of the Endurance Drive is that there's really no magic sauce. Like building your aerobic engine via Zone 2 is real and it works. We know that. Fueling is real and it works. Honoring your life stress is real and it works. And if you cover all those bases, I think you'll probably get to 95% of where you need to be. So Jim, like you and I could go out and quibble over like, well, do we think we should do the headband or not? And I will say we probably have the same philosophy on that. But at the end of the day, I think if most of our athletes are following these very, very basic ideas and they have a partner and a coach to do that, then I think we're in pretty good shape. All right, next question here. I've been thinking a lot lately about how my chosen career path aligns or doesn't with my love for swim, bike, run, and outdoor adventures. Hoping that I'll be able to make everything work long-term, but honestly feeling a little bit overwhelmed at the moment. Any chance you might be able to share an anecdote or two, either from yourself or athletes you've coached, about integrating swim, bike, run into busy seasons of life? So I feel this big time. And I think sometimes we do have to sort of surrender to various seasons of life. So if we go back to that scarcity mindset that I was talking about at the beginning, I personally am pretty scared about future moments in life when I know that I won't have the flexibility or the time that I have now to train. And this is interesting because I actually had a conversation with a friend who had a baby recently and who probably adventured and trained about as much as I did before having her kid. And she said it surprised her how much less endurance she is needed to feel like her soul cup is pretty full because there's something different and better that's filling that cup, which is actually having a kid. And she kind of hopes and acknowledges that she'll maybe have some more time down the line and she knows she'll get back to that at some point. But a lot of it does come down to kind of riding out these different seasons of life and acknowledging that anything that feels out of balance, like this too shall pass. But I know that's probably not super practical in terms of just like, accept it, it's a season of life. So I would say it can be helpful when you're really, really busy to try to identify what it is about endurance that really fills your cup and then see how you can prioritize that piece of it with really limited time. So is it the outside time? It's like then move if you can work or study outside, even just for 20 or 30 minutes, get a little bit of that sunlight, try to do that. Is it the community? Well, ground in your work community or the people that you have to interact with no matter what. You can figure out how to kind of pull out tendrils of that community building. Is it the endorphins? Then maybe it's exercise snacks. I know some of my friends who've been through med school have literally said, like, I have 2 minutes free on a bathroom break and I'm going to run up and down the stairs one time and just get a little hit of endorphins. And no, that's not the same as going out for an amazing 6-mile trail run, but it's something. And just getting out and like, being a little bit in touch with something like that is pretty important. And I'll say I tried to do this a lot earlier this year when I was really, really overwhelmed with finishing my PhD dissertation. And physically and mentally and emotionally, I was not doing well at all. So I didn't really have a lot of time to kind of just go out and do a ton of fun endurance things. And honestly, my body wasn't even really supporting doing that at the time. But what I did was I stripped down my activity to basically 30 to 45 minutes a day of zero data, so no watch, left it at home, outdoor movement. And eventually this started to feel like enough, and then also got me excited for, getting to do more when I got through those hard parts. So it was a big moment of like, no, I don't like doing this dissertation, but it's really important to do it, and this too shall pass. And yeah, I'm just sending a lot of love to this listener and know that it won't always be like this. And yeah, good for you for doing the best that you can.
Yeah, this is such a great question. I think we're all struggling to some degree. And I'm looking at my answer here to this question. And basically, Katie, you just answered exactly. I just sort of rewrote what you said, but you said it much better than I did. But we talk about periodization and training, that kind of thing. And I really feel like there's just periods of life where it's like, okay, I know this is going to be busy here, but I'm going to have some time over here. Okay, when it's grind time, I got to grind. When it's not the grind time, I've got some other time. So I sometimes get very focused on like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have time to do this. But then I sort of bump out and say, okay, this is a period that's maybe for me is like just like a busy week, or the next couple of days are super, super, super busy. So this period it's work period time, right? But then I've got some playtime coming along. So it helps me to sort of bump out and sort of practically look at my calendar and sort of say, work time, playtime, wherever that may be. And then I think for me this year, because I got injured pretty bad, I was really scared going into that and saying, oh my gosh, I need exercise, I need it. And so just letting folks know that, even if maybe you're in med school or whatever, or law school or something, or whatever it is, just a super busy job, if you don't have time to do it, it's going to be okay, because you're going to come out the other side and you are going to figure it out. You're smart, you're creative, you'll figure out ways to get what you need, or at least, spend some time identifying what you need. And, for me, it was like, okay, I can maybe go walk for 30 minutes. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go do that. And it may just be on the road, but that's what I got. Those are the constraints I have. And so that's what I'm doing. It has turned out that it was okay. I came out alive on the other side, but it was really stressful, and it's really stressful. And so I really feel for folks who just have a lot of demands on their time, and it is really hard. But you guys are all smart. You'll figure it out, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like radical acceptance of the situation. Like there's not that much that you can do if you are working 14-hour days every single day, and you've also got to grocery shop and do your laundry and take care of kids. And if you can just kind of lean into this is the reality right now, I think that acceptance piece is the first part. But that doesn't mean that you have to settle for being really unhappy. There's always different levers that you can pull. So
I had a couple conversations the last couple of weeks of people who are going to do Ironman next year. And I've got one athlete who, he's a level 1 athlete. When we say that, it's just sort of a beginner athlete, but he's got a limited window until he goes to law school. I know he's going to throw himself deep, deep, deep into law school when he starts. And so he's like, I can do an Ironman next May. So we started going through it. Okay, do you have the skills? And it turns out he does have the skills. He worked really, really hard this year. He was very, very thoughtful. And I know Katie, you talk about journaling and Training Peaks. And this particular athlete journals all the time in Training Peaks and is very, very thoughtful about how they train. And so I just said, listen, you are a new athlete and you really theoretically shouldn't be doing Ironman before going in, law school next fall. But I actually believe that you do have the skills and the ability to do this because it is limited time. And you've been so thoughtful through this whole entire process that we can bridge the gap and fill in all the skills that you don't have. I know you'll learn them. You've learned so many of them already. And let's go for that Ironman in May. And again, it's not the ideal thing, but it's what we got. And so he's going to go for it and he'll do great.
That's awesome. I love that story. All right, that was a good one. Let's transition to our next one. What do you wish you knew when you first started endurance sports? So I can jump in on this one first. I think I can distill the number one best piece of advice that I try to give my athletes, and I also really try to give our Dartmouth athletes, is that if you don't fuel enough or fuel properly, you won't get faster and you will get injured. And it's so tough. I think this is something that probably would have saved me from a lot of injuries if I had known this early on. What's challenging is, we hear a lot about fuel enough, but I think we often don't even really know how to fuel endurance activity really, really well. And this is especially true for young athletes who are starting out, because at the end of the day, it's very different from just like you're living life and you're a kid and like maybe you had food totally taken care of because you were being raised by parents that did that. And then you're on your own, you're starting a new sport and you don't really know. So even learning something as simple as like, hey, as soon as you finish your workout, you've really got to get in a mix of protein and carbs. And that's super important for replenishing the glycogen that you lost. Or you should probably eat something before you go train because that's going to give you the energy that you need. And it's cool for me to see how much performance benefit I can get from, first, the baseline is just fuel enough, but then actually by using fuel to optimize performance. So we've talked a lot about high carb fueling, that 70 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. Again, the enough piece is really, really important, but the optimization I think is really cool. So I don't know. I'm really excited about how my performance has taken off now that I've made fueling such a huge priority, one that's just as big as swimming and biking and running, and arguably probably way higher than swimming and on par with biking and running for me. But it's sort of like a sky is the limit type thing. And I think, Jim, you and I have talked about this on many podcasts, but one of the coolest things to see from our athletes this year is everybody having performance breakthroughs that are not necessarily just driven by the training. It's like almost 100% by the fuel. So definitely want to pass that on as an important piece of advice.
Yep. So many fueling success stories this year. It's amazing. I actually never thought this was possible. Like, yeah, we knew it was critical, but that have this many stories come out over and over again, like almost every week. It's just like amazing. So I think this is great advice. My advice here was, what did I wish I knew? I wish I wasn't such an asshole narcissist when I started this sport, honestly, if you want to like boil it down. I mean, a lot of folks who, not surprised to most of our listeners that we're very serious folks and who were really thinking a lot and we're pretty wound tightly. And so, I just took it very seriously. And on one hand, it was great because I went after the sport very hard and learned a lot. And a lot of what I learned early on is what I still bring to my athletes today. So there's a good side to this whole thing, and I did have some races that I'm proud of. But on the other hand, I wish I'd just been a little bit more balanced, a little bit nicer, and a little bit more considerate to those around me and probably to myself as well.
That's really self-reflective. I like that you said that. And I think all of us probably have a tendency to, in the beginning, take it really, really seriously. Maybe not everyone. Maybe we've been able to kind of craft athletes along the right path who are newer, but I think anyone who has an intense personality can get really, really big results because you go all in on all of this stuff and you're willing to do anything to make it happen. But I think maybe something that we've both kind of learned over our journeys is not getting lost. Is it like the forest for the trees, whatever that metaphor is, like really being able to identify what the big picture is. And now that we're all like, we're super woo-woo and we talk about mental preparedness and connection and all this cool stuff. But I do think that doesn't have to be at the expense of performance either. And I actually think that's where the very best performances come from. So it's good. It's a journey. And we're here to help other people not make the same mistakes that we did.
Yep. I made every mistake. So that's what I love about coaching. Like, guys, if there's 100 ways to do something and 99 are wrong, I did all 99. But I'm here to tell you, here's the one way. I think it's a lot better to do this. Just start with the one way. That's better.
That's fantastic. Love it. Okay. This is related. Next question. What has been the most surprising or challenging shift you've had to make as you age? How have you needed to change your approach to training and racing?
Wow, this one hits.
I know. Jim just turned 35 and he's having a tough time.
Well, I know. Yeah. My 30s. I'm having this crisis in my 30s. Okay. So, middle-aged guy here talking. Probably having to earn my endurance time by lifting heavy weights regularly. Almost all my master athletes. When I say master athletes, I mean like anywhere after like 40, 45, we just start losing so much muscle mass. And you see it. And I remember the first time I went to the weight room, actually it was at Dartmouth, and I looked at the full-length mirror, and I looked in the mirror, and I thought, oh my God, who's that guy? That guy he doesn't look healthy. Like, I was really, really fit, but I was like, that guy does not look healthy at all. So lifting is a big one. And then also what's come a much more surprise is having to nap after big workouts. And I think that's just a matter of like my central nervous system, my brain just gets more tired on bigger days. And I think part of that is that a little bit aging. Part of it, I think also too, is I'm just getting a little bit better at invoking the parasympathetic nervous system and not being so serious about my thing. And so like just driving all the time, like get done a big workout and start like, I'm going to drive to the next thing. And so I think now I get to the big workout. So, oh, I just did a big workout. It's time to recover. And so I do take a nap. If I feel tired. So I think there's a little bit of both going on there. And the last thing here is that big focus on protein at every meal. And unfortunately, I have to limit my alcohol intake as well, too. So nightly gin and tonics, no longer. Nope, no more martinis at night. Nope, that's just not going to happen. So.
Yeah, well, I can answer this question too. I am not middle-aged yet, but I guess I'm on my way. I don't know. So anyway, I will say even just in the 10 years that I've been doing this sport, +1 on alcohol, like it has a huge influence on how I feel the next day. There's sort of a funny story here where when I was training for my first Ironman, Lake Placid in 2019, one of our friends threw this Mardi Gras party. And Jim, you had put a 12-mile run on the calendar for a Sunday. And I went to the Mardi Gras party the night before. And many of my friends will affectionately call me Drady, like when I go out and have a little fun time. And I had a really fun time at this Mardi Gras party. And then I woke up and I did my 12-mile run after having like way too much fun. Like nobody should have the level of fun that I had in this night. And there is a 0% chance that I could do that right now. Like now I will go to like a nice wine bar with a friend and have 2 glasses of wine and go to bed and wake up and be like, am I dying? I might actually be dying. So all this is to say, I definitely limit my alcohol intake, especially in season. Again, sometimes it's okay to do something and just accept those consequences, but I don't think it really helps. And I see those stats with my Oura Ring. I paid a lot more attention to how much it can tank your sleep and your HRV to do some heavy drinking the night before a workout.
There are some epic stories out there of Drady going hard in the evening, waking up, cleaning the entire house before everybody wakes up, doing a 8, 10, 12-mile run, getting back, and like, hey guys, I'm up. People like just wandering around the house going, I'm so hungover. You're like, yeah, the house is clean, and I went off on the right run. So there's some epic Drady stories out there. So if you ask around,
that's for a whole other podcast. Certainly not this one. But all right, and I'll add something else. So one other thing I've thought a lot about as I've kind of progressed and aged a little bit is that I've been having trouble thinking about how to put this into words, but I think it's that I've found that I'm more affected by LSS or life stress score than I used to be. And maybe that's actually now that I'm just less willing to push through and just do any workout as planned if I feel like I'm having a tough time, kind of more psychologically. And maybe part of that is like, I use more data now. I pay attention to my sleep quality and I pay attention to my heart rate. But I can really, really feel the difference between a training session when I'm under a lot of stress and one that's lower life stress. So I've experienced like things like chest pain before or headaches or just seeing my heart rate go crazy. And I will say this is actually dovetailed with a lot of important mental, emotional work. We are huge proponents on this podcast. We've talked about therapy is really helpful. And the idea that it's not actually that helpful to just bury it anytime you have a bad feeling ever and be like, I'm not going to feel that. I'm going to push that right down. So for me, I'm like, all right, here I am. I'm doing the thing. I'm feeling my feelings. But that also has required me to kind of have a lower bar for modifying workout. And I'm really glad that I've done that. I think long term, it's probably for the best because at the end of the day, pushing through really high stress is a great recipe for illness or injury or just not making progress. But that's something that's changed from earlier on when, again, I would just put my head down, clean the kitchen, and do a 12-mile run. Not sure how much fitness benefit I was getting from that. And yeah, that's big progress for me.
So you're no longer all green box Katie. Is that what you're saying?
No. Yeah. Oh my gosh. You should see my training pizza. It's a hot mess. And I am proud of that. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I got some grays, got some yellows, got some reds. And it's a rainbow of colors because we're all, rainbows and butterflies right now.
That's the spice of life, though. That's the thing. I think you are really living life, I think real, in quotes. Mm-hmm. I think when you do have like the gray and the mist ones, the mood ones, and the yellows and the reds and the greens. So that's like life. I think we talked about this before. We're worried when we see an athlete just hitting green box after green box after green box, knowing that they are probably rearranging their life and maybe not being the most conscientious, maybe family member or employee or something. And so, yeah, all green boxes can be actually a warning flag. And, again, we've done all this. We've lived through all green box era. And we come out the other side going, there's probably a different way to do this that's maybe a little bit more healthier and sustainable.
Totally. All right, Jim, question specifically for you. What has been the hardest part of getting injured and what has surprised you the most? And for anyone who has not been following along, Jim had a pretty big spiral fracture of his hip area in the spring, and it's been a little bit of a journey to get back from that.
Oh, the hardest part was, ouch, it hurt.
The hardest part was smashing it on the ground.
The hardest part was the people from the bank who were, I fell in front of the bank, and the bank employees were like, wow, this guy's actually screaming his head off. We better call the ambulance just to get him out of here. He's bad for business. Let's get him off the cement out in front of the building. So that was the hard part. But no, probably the second hard part was just that I just didn't have any contact. So the only other break I really had is I actually fell off my bike watching a race, some Dartmouth Tri Kids run the Chad half marathon, and I fell off and just probably a hairline fracture in my wrist. And that took like the standard 12 weeks. And after 12 weeks, I was like, oh, I'm all better. And so I thought, okay, well, great. I broke a bone. Oh, actually broke it twice. And I said, okay, 12 weeks, I'll be ready to go. I'm going to do a century at week 12. Well, I got to week 12. And I had some major setbacks because I was pushing too hard. Surprise, surprise. And I was not at 100%. I was more like 50% or even less. I really had a big setback in week 11, week 12. So yeah, just big expectations that I was like, I'm gonna be pushing through. So I started talking to more people who had like big breaks, broken their legs, broken their arms. I said, hey, how long did it really take you to come back and feel like you were you again? And the common answer was either 9 months, or a lot of people said a year. I said a year later, I can finally wake up and wonder which arm did I break or which leg did I break, that kind of thing. And so I just started reframing everything, saying, okay, if I show up, so this happened in late April or something. If I get to even, December of 2024 and I feel fantastic, that'll be a big win. So I am back on the bike now and I am doing some activities, but yeah, still a few months probably to go until I feel really good again. So just having to reframe everything, that's been sort of the hardest part. And so I guess I'm thankful that I didn't have a context for this, and hopefully I don't break the next one because I've learned these lessons. But that's probably been the hardest part.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. And I think anyone who's out there dealing with injury or different people deal with chronic illness, there's a lot of stuff out there. Just keep in mind that sometimes not having your expectations met can be the hardest part. It's hope can be awesome and also sort of dangerous because you get your hopes out about something. So really appreciate you sharing that experience. And I'm sure if anyone themselves is dealing with a big injury, I'm sure they can reach out and chat with Jim.
Okay, next question here. What are you most excited about in terms of coaching for next year, Katie? Any different approaches, or what's on your mind?
Yeah, so this should surprise no one, but it's not new swims, it's not new bikes, it's not new runs, it's mindset work because we're a psychology podcast. And again, I'm interested in this because this is something I'm focusing on as an athlete myself. And I talked about this last week where, yes, I have some goals for next year, but my number one biggest outcome goal is a smoother mental pathway to the season. So an example of that is many of my athletes, we've been doing a post-season debrief call, and we've been going through the goal mapping exercise that we've talked about last time. And that's been really, really cool. Another example is I've been kind of pushing people to write down in their Training Peaks comments or even just in a journal for themselves after every workout, what went well and what was one mental strength that they exercised. And I think often I have a tendency, for example, to use Training Peaks comments to name 6 things that didn't go well. It's well, my heart rate was bad because of this and that and whatever. And this exercise has forced me to just kind of generate a little bit more positive thinking. So that's been really cool. And I would say, my athletes can look forward to some more specific instructions in their Training Peaks for upping that mindset game. That's just the same as doing IM 3x10.
Well, I'm hoping I can steal some of that stuff because I think you're right on track. And I think this certainly would have been my answer as well, too. And also for me, for next year, I want to create some more programming around, we talked about these level 1 athletes and about just building up skills at this level 1. So I want to create some more programming that are less that are workouts and more hey, go out and ride your bike. And then when you ride your bike, I want you to be able to work on, drinking from your water bottle or taking something out of your back pocket to eat. So just a lot of things, or maybe technical 50s in swimming. So again, just really focusing a lot more on skills so that folks get to that level. We think the level 1 is super, super important. It can be, again, a few years to be a level 1 athlete. But that's where you learn all the really fundamentals of triathlon. And so most of my stuff now is mostly workout based. And yeah, fitness is definitely part of it. But I think we've recognized this year, mindset skills and all kinds of other skills are super, super important. And so sort of stepping back a little bit and saying, okay, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe somebody doesn't even know how to shift their bike or brake correctly or feel comfortable riding their bike outside. So let's focus on some of that. Because I think we build up athletes from that perspective, from the skills perspective, the fitness takes care of itself. And again, sort of goals and paces and races, that all sort of take care of themselves when you just are competent at your sport.
Yeah, I think the more that we coach and we talk about this stuff, I'm realizing fitness is the easiest part of triathlon. It really is. If you sign up, you're probably driven, you can get fitness.
Yes.
It's totally chill. Skills are hard. Fueling is hard. Mindset is hard. And so the more that we can push on those inputs, I think will be huge.
100%. Yes, doing a workout is the easiest thing in the world. It's everything else that surrounds it. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
All right, so we've got a couple more rapid fire-ish questions here. This one is, what is on your life bucket list for races and adventures? So I can jump in on this one first. I would really like to run a standalone marathon. So I have run 5 marathons in an Ironman. I've done a lot of like 50K type big trail days, all of that. So the mileage is not an issue for me, but I would love to feel what it's like to actually just go out fresh and do a marathon. I would love to eventually qualify for Boston and do Boston. And I also kind of want to do like a fast 5K sometime soon. I've been thinking about that. I haven't raced a 5K in a little while. So that might be fun, and doing like a little bit of a track speed progression for that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you're a glutton for punishment. I think, honestly, I tell a lot of my runners, I think that marathon's even harder than Ironman sometimes. Yeah. So, yeah. So,
but I don't know. I haven't done it, so I feel like I need an apples to apples comparison.
But big respect. Yeah, that's a great list. And mine are, I would just like to get to Europe and do some hiking and biking. I haven't been over there much, and so I want to go to Switzerland and France and Italy and just like cruise around the mountains, and either with bike or on foot or anything, even maybe on skis. And then a friend of ours, Steve, did the Grand Tour projects this year, and I put a link to there, and he just pre-rode all stages of the Giro d'Italia this year. So 21 stages, a huge thing. And I think he started the year before doing 7 stages. So I think it'd be kind of a fun thing to go to Europe and pre-ride, because you can pre-ride all the stages beforehand, because the pros start at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you get out there before like 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, you pre-ride the stage. I think that'd be kind of cool. And I would love to get back to Alaska to do some caribou hunting, because that was not only really about the hunting part of it, but just being out in that terrain, in that big, huge terrain and glaciers, and just the majesty of Alaska, walking around up there in boots. And so I'd love to get back into that as well.
Yeah, if you didn't listen to our episode 2 weeks ago with Catherine Roki and you want to learn a little bit more what it's like in Alaska, you should definitely check that out. And it sounds like caribou stuff is very much an endurance activity. So
it is.
Cool. Okay. What off-season adventure are you most excited about this year?
Like every year, Nordic skiing, winter hiking. That was an easy one.
Totally. I'm excited about both those things as well. And I'll say my off-season adventure, I'm excited to do some group stuff. So we've been kind of scheming about some endurance drive meetups in the Whites. And then also, I've talked about this before, I've hiked all the 4,000 footers in Maine. There's 14, all 48 in New Hampshire. And I've only done 1 out of the 5 in Vermont. So I would like to finish my Vermont 4,000 peaks at some point during the off-season.
Take a weekend and just finish them off, Katie.
I know. Okay, this is actually, we just answered this. What endurance drive off-season activities might you be planning for the local New England crew over the winter? She says, hopefully. I think we're hoping to get out there for some fun stuff in the Whites, and definitely reach out to us in the community. Let us know what you want to do. We always welcome inspiration. And if you're a listener and you don't know us, you're in the area, you should still reach out, because we're always trying to build that community for sure. All right, next question. What is your go-to favorite meal after a big training day or race sim? Jim, take it away.
Oh boy, I think our answer is we're going to be very similar. But yeah, a burger. I love a burger, and I've tried lots of different things, and there's lots of great food. I love all kinds of good food. But for me, like, it just fills me up, and like it just sort of quenches the hunger, shall we say, in the stomach. So I'm going with the Worthy Burger or the Worthy Kitchen. They're both in Vermont-based locations.
Yeah, and I said a burger too. Like, think about that Vermont cheddar, maybe some bacon, lettuce, tomato, avocado. I love sweet potato fries on the side. And I actually highly recommend this particular burger at the Woodstock Inn, which is in Woodstock, New Hampshire. And that is right at the end of, if you do like a Pemi Loop or you do the White Mountain Century, we always end in Woodstock. And we have showed up like looking like these bedraggled completely. Like, we always say, like, you show up looking like a refugee and you walk into the Woodstock Inn and you get a burger there. So highly recommend those particular burgers. What is another food question people want to know about what we eat today? What is your number one, my body is not a temple binge food that you indulge in?
Yeah, I love this question. So for me, it's the Farmer in the Bill. I put a link here. She's not open yet. She was open for a little while in Queechee, Vermont, and she'll be open again, I think, in January of 2025. But hands down, the best donuts in the entire world. So that's my binge food. I cannot wait for that to happen. And then sort of secondarily is really anything from the King Arthur flour, which is over here in Norwich, Vermont, from the bakery.
Totally. Those are amazing. I will say my binge food that I love is cookie dough, because I'm a child, basically. And I'm actually that person that we all hate that will get a pint of cookie dough ice cream from Ben & Jerry's. And then my husband Connor calls me the excavator, because I go in there with a spoon and just excavate the cookie dough out of the cookie dough ice cream. And then I leave the vanilla behind for Connor. And yes, I am aware that you can buy the cookie dough alone. They started selling that. But I actually like the frozen and slightly coated ice cream texture flavors. So I have to do the whole excavation, which I am aware makes me a terrible, terrible person. But I'm living my authentic life and I am not going to apologize.
Right. And what Connor does for love, right? He tolerates it. Yeah, he loves it. And he'll eat the vanilla ice cream. Good, what a good boy. Shout out to Connor.
Shout out to Connor, as always. Okay, so Jim, I'm looking at our list here. I think that we may leave all of our training questions. We have about 15 training questions. I think maybe let's push that to our next episode because we have so many of them.
Sure.
We'll finish up these questions with this one here that says, what's on your 2024 top 10 playlist? And also asking if we can have an Endurance Drive Spotify exchange. The answer is yes, we will definitely get that set up. But I was thinking maybe we'll share. We have a lot of shared music interests from over the years in the Pain Cave. So a couple songs or artists to recommend are, there's a song called Atlantic City. It is a Bruce Springsteen song, but it's a cover by the band. And that was our Ironman Lake Placid 2019 song. We would play it at the very end of every single Pain Cave spin session that we did. And it's one of my favorite songs in the world. So put that on your playlist. I wouldn't say it's like a particularly like upbeat, like Eye of the Tiger, motivated, like, but it's a great song for the Endurance Drive. So highly recommend that. A related one is there's a song called It's a Great Day to Be Alive by Travis Tritt. And there's a lot of other country bangers that we would listen to in the Pain Cave. So it's almost like an ironic, like if you're having a terrible day out there, just play It's a Great Day to Be Alive and you can sort of like laugh through the misery. This is a little known fact, but Jim and I, probably not for me, but Jim and I are both Swifties. So big fan of Taylor Swift. There's some great Taylor Swift music out there. And so we'll nerd out over that. Both big fans of a band called Bonnie Light Horseman. Again, this is like good acoustic type vibes and stuff. None of these are going to be like heavy metal, go fast music, but it's all really good. And then Jim, I think on here you put 80s playlist, just in general, anything 80s?
In the 80s. Of course, 80s was the greatest, music generation of all time, of course. So for the bias there. But yeah, we all love 80s, right? I think.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you've turned me on to a lot of that. So it's good stuff for sure. Okay, so we're going to skip our training questions. Thank you to everyone who sent them in. We will answer them probably next week or the week after. We're going to talk about carb intake and electrolytes and saddle sores and erg mode and heart rate and a bunch of other cool stuff. But I think just so we don't keep you on for 6 hours, we should probably move into our challenge of the week. So my challenge of this week is after your next workout, I mentioned this earlier, write down one thing that went well and one mental strength that you exercised. And I'll actually share a quick story. So I've been doing this in this new training log that I'm working on kind of for my next season. And I had a really bad bike ride the other day where I just really didn't feel that good. I wasn't sure what was going on. And I finished up and I was like, I'm ready to jump into my training log and write about 11 things that were all really, really bad. And then I realized, there's no box in my new training log to talk about anything that was bad. There's only this what went well and mental strength box. And it was interesting because I was really forced to think super critically about like, well, what actually did go well here? And I will tell you that there is always something good that you can take out of your workout. And so for me, what this was what went well? Well, I set up my bike well after flying with it to California. Like, no, nothing else went great, but I didn't have any issues setting it up. I was a big girl. I got it done. And so that was something that went well. And I was like, you know what? You can be proud of yourself for that. And then a mental strength that I exercised was, yeah, I felt like total shit, but I still tried to keep the positive self-talk up. We've been talking about P3 thinking and just say like, yeah, you flew in late last night, you're dehydrated. It's going to be a really stressful day of work and meetings and you didn't get any sleep. Like, that's okay. You're out here. That's awesome. And so that was valuable for me because my reflex, or I guess a reactive thought, was to be like, this completely sucked. I hated everything about this and I am not fit as a result. So it was helpful for me to do that. And I recommend that to all of our listeners.
I love that. And just love that idea of like that little drip by drip, sort of small brick by small brick, positive, right? Reflections and journaling. And, we always talk about that as like an exercise snack, but this is like the positivity snack, right? Just a little tiny thing. And it's going to be really interesting, to see those things just add up and see how that all affects just performance and like how you feel like through next year as well too. If people are just journaling this over and over again, little bits, that just be super interesting. So I'm really see how that comes out.
And I think it's interesting too, because the point of this is actually just to make that automatic. So if you practice it enough time, you can learn how to do anything. We say like fitness is easy because the more times that you do a zone 2 run, the better you're going to get at zone 2. That's awesome. Or the more technical 50s that you do, the faster you're going to swim. But here it's like the more that you effortfully practice positive thinking and all of these strategies, the more that will become just the automatic thing. So maybe when you're out there for the next ride, you're not going to be like, wow, here's 11 reasons that this sucked. You're just going to automatically be like, yeah, my heart rate's up a little bit today, but also I set up my bike and it was awesome and I didn't need help to do it. And that's just your default thought. So I think that's what we're trying to change here. What we're all trying to work on is just automatic positive thoughts, because those will make you better, not just because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy. It's because it actually improves performance. And that's what I'm about. I'm not about warm and fuzzy. This should surprise no one. I'm like, tell me what the secrets are to improve my performance. So if it's telling myself that I've put the bike together, like, that's fantastic.
Atta girl, there she is. There she is.
All right. Challenge of the week, Jim.
Challenge of the week. Mine is, well, I sort of ran into this sort of inadvertently this week. I was doing just a heart-based meditation from Kimberly Snyder. I mentioned her book, I think, a couple episodes ago. And she was online, and she said, well, we're going to do a little meditation. It's like, oh, okay, I'll do the meditation. Why not? There's like 50 people on this live Instagram stream. So kind of felt special. I was like, oh, I'm there with Kimberly. So anyway, go through this whole thing. That was a really cool meditation. But then at the end, she goes, hey, and now I want you to drop an intention, set an intention for the upcoming week. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And just sort of thought of one thing. And then I just found through the whole week, like I wake up and I think that's kind of almost the first thing on my mind when I wake up. And it's been just kind of cool to set this intention and then just be like, oh, it's there every week. And it's been an improvement in my life. And so anyway, set an intention on Sunday. I will say that I also had the football game going on in the background. So I'm not some sort of like, woo-woo meditation guru. I was like, quote, meditating. And I was also listening to Patrick Mahomes, throw long passes. So that's just for context, just so we're just sort of honest here about the conditions that I was in.
And so your intention is to be more mindful than you were in that moment.
I thought my intention was to be like more like Patrick Mahomes. But
there you go.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. We all want to be more like Patrick Mahomes, for sure. Okay, gear pick of the week. I'm going to have a food pick of the week. We've answered a couple questions about nutrition today, and I don't know if I've recommended these before as an official gear pick of the week, but my favorite way to fuel, especially for long stuff and on the go, is Go Macro bars. So this is a granola bar. We also love Nature's Bakery fig bars, but these have a little bit more heft to them, a little bit more fat and protein. And so if I need a post-workout snack, if I'm traveling, anything like that, I'm a huge fan of these bars. And in particular, I am a huge fan of the oatmeal chocolate chip flavor. I don't mess around with any of the other flavors. I am just into this particular flavor. And I always have at least 3 of these bars in any bag that I own. So highly recommend.
You don't mess around with the other flavors.
No,
sir. Not at all. I love that. I'm going to follow on that same theme as, so just somebody you like just on the go, quick snack, either before workouts, even after workouts, the Aloha protein bars. They're plant-based. They're my go-to snack. I really like the chocolate, and then I just actually ordered and got a box of the sea salt ones, which are actually quite good as well too. So I do mess around with some of the other flavors as well too. There's a mint chocolate I do get because it's like it's on like Amazon Subscribe and Save, and I can't figure out how to cancel it. So I just keep getting those. So if you need any of those, I've got like 25 boxes.
You do you. You can mess around with as many flavors as you want, and I'll just enjoy my oatmeal chocolate chip over here with the Go Macros. Sweet. Okay, well, this was really fun. We promise we will answer all of these training questions in upcoming episodes. So thank you to everyone who sent those in, and thank you to everyone for listening. And Jim, thank you for doing this with me. It's been really, really fun, and I think it's only getting more fun, and we're only getting more into it as we go. So we will be around for another 50 and another 50 after that. And yeah, it's all good here at the Endurance Drive podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Same here. This has just been, it's been great. It's been just like, this is creating art, right? It's making us better coaches, better people, creating art. It's just been such a cool thing. It's been a community event as well, too. So thank you to you. Thanks to everybody who does spend a little time with us every week. I really appreciate it. And anyway, thanks, peeps.